I do want to say thank you because we missed saying it earlier. Thank you very much to Global Television and also CFRB Radio. They've been wonderful in their coverage, so thanks to those two media outlets. I just wanted to mention one thing, though. A week ago on my show, I asked the question, why has nonfiction not received the same kind of attention as fiction in this country? And I put together a book panel. Actually, they're all here today. Andrew Westall, who's last year's winner of the Charles Taylor Award, he was on the panel. Diane Turbide, who is with Penguin, and also my book columnist, Aaron Balser from CBC. They said some very thoughtful things, and I got a fabulous response to that panel. People, it really seemed to touch a chord in them, this whole debate about nonfiction. I'm not going to tell you what the panel said. That would take too long. But I got one email. I got many, but this one, it touched me. And I just wanted to read a couple of lines. And this woman from Toronto, she answered the question, why should we read nonfiction at all? And this is what she said. It's too bad that nonfiction is not publicized and sold more, because in addition to having stories, and in this case, true stories and mysteries, nonfiction also gives us a sense of ourselves, of our country, and of human character. Nonfiction books take years to write. If you're a historian, you have to prove through research everything you're saying. But when you get on track of something remarkable in history, and you find out what happened, it's not only informative, it's thrilling. Too bad some Canadians are missing out on this writing. So I thought that was very well put. I just wanted to share that with you today. And I can only hope that awards such as these are bringing more attention to the genre. Just before I introduce the jurors, I did want to ask Noreen a question because, well, there's a term that she was using and I was really puzzled by it. So I asked her to come up. Noreen, you've used the term handicap, and of course I know your horse racing background, but you used it in terms of the jurors. So what did you mean by handicapping the jurors?
First of all, Mary, I want that woman to write my material. You know?
She did my job.
Exactly. Secondly, there's a bunch of rap trats in the room, Susan Wilmot, Ethel Mills, and Benta Firestone, and we all know that what a handicap is a kind of horse race where the past victories of a horse are rated by professionals, and frankly, the horse that does the best gets to carry the most weight. And then they have a race which is sort of equal. Well, the authors, I'm not going to do that to you, but the jurors, I figure out their past histories, what their strengths are, and I sort of weight them, and then I come up with a conclusion. So I handicap them. Does it make sense? Edward, does this make sense? It makes sense, okay. Answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Is this going to make me a better bettor, though, at the racetrack? That's what I want to know. Is that going to help me?
I don't know, but come to the racetrack with me anytime.
Okay, right now we are going to continue with the awards and the 2013 Charles Taylor Prize for Literary Nonfiction. I would like to introduce the three jurors to you. Suzanne Boyce is one of North America's most respected program chiefs in television. She's been a producer, a programmer, and an executive at both public and private TV networks. Most recently, she served as president, CTV Creative, Content, and Specialties. Richard Gwynn is an award-winning author and columnist for the Toronto Star, also a frequent contributor to television and radio. He is a past winner of the Charles Taylor Prize in 2008 for his book, John A., The Man Who Made Us, The Life and Times of John A. Macdonald, 1815 to 1867. Joseph Curtis is an award-winning novelist and the founder of Humber College's creative writing and comedy programs. He's currently Humber's Dean of Creative and Performing Arts. His awards include the Stephen Leacock Memorial Medal for Humor and the U.S. National Jewish Book Award for Nonfiction. These are our jurors. Please welcome them.
I've got a few minutes in the spotlight. I'd like to take maximum advantage of it by starting out by disagreeing with Noreen Taylor. Quite severely. She started out her talk, before we got into the meal, by thanking the three members of the jury, and that was an absurd and totally unnecessary thing to do. We owe her a huge debt We are three of the luckiest people, anybody interested in books, amongst all those people, almost everybody in this room, if not everybody in this room, we were luckier than anybody else in this room and in a long way out of it. We got to see every single book written by a Canadian and published by a Canadian publisher in the last year. And we had the chance to read them and then to learn from them. We all learned a lot. We learned a lot from each other. We argued, we discussed, and so on. And it was one of my most pleasurable experiences in literature of one kind or another. And I'm quite certain that is true equally for Suzanne Boyce and Joe Curtis. Thank you very much indeed, Noreen. The other thing I'd like to, thank you. The other thing I'd like to mention is something that came to me while I was working away as a jury member. And I noticed something about the books. And that was a remarkable proportion of them, somewhere between a fifth and a quarter, depending on how you define things, were written, of course, by Canadians, published by a Canadian publisher, but the subject was not Canada. Canada might appear, but in a minor role. And here you had a considerable number of Canadian writers confident enough of themselves, of their ability to write about events or personalities or whatever on the other side of two oceans or way down south in the Americas. And it was quite remarkable. It was clear, to me, a clear trend. The largest numbers you'd expect were set in the Middle East, but others were set in Asia, Africa, and in the Americas. And not only were these authors confident of themselves, of their ability to describe, capture accurately a scene or an event or a person outside of Canada, a long, long way from Canada, thousands of kilometers from Canada, but they were able to assume that there were enough people in this country who were prepared to read a book about some distant spot, event, was written by a Canadian. The long step, of course, still to be taken is for people outside in the big wide world to similarly take for granted that a Canadian is capable of writing about their scene as well as them, and is worth reading. There have been examples. You can think of course, Naomi Klein, you can think of Margaret Miller, but that is the long step ahead of us. But we've taken quite a stride in this. There is a large number of Canadians who are at home in the wide world. This is their home, but they're at home in the wide world. And that is part of the way our country is becoming an extraordinary one, as we all know. I mean, it is the most globalized, the most multicultural, the most internationalized, either that or well on its way to becoming all of those things, in which we are comfortable with the world, and the world is going to increasingly recognize us. So that was one of the things I learned from this exercise, and I was very pleased and grateful to Noreen for giving me the opportunity to learn that. Thank you very much.
So let me just explain now what is going to happen. We're going to have a presentation to all the finalists at this point. The jurors will be reading citations for each of them. We will call them. They will come up to the stage one by one. And Noreen is going to present one of these beautiful leather-bound books. It is a copy of their book, and created by Felton Bookbinding in Georgetown. So thank you very much to Felton Bookbinding for these books. And then the author will come over to me, and I will ask a question or two. So we can get started.
Okay, the 2013 Charles Taylor Prize for Literary Nonfiction finalists are
Carol Bishop Gwynn for The Pursuit of Perfection, A Life of Celia Franca, published by Cormorant Books. Of the book, the jury wrote, with great art and skill, Carol Bishop Gwynn does for Celia Franca what history requires and demands. She gives us the complex story of an artist, both driven and tyrannical, both sensitive and unreasonable, but someone able with little help and in what was little more than a cultural backwater to found a ballet company which was to become one of the best in the world, the National Ballet of Canada. The company still bears her stamp. Bishop Gwynn's rich biography tells us exactly why. Carol.
Is this true? Are you wearing the National Ballet colors?
I certainly am, and I have my National Ballet scarf at the table. Yes.
I didn't even know there were National Ballet colors. I'm sorry. What are they? Pink and...
Well, the colors, there's a beautiful scarf that was done for the 60th anniversary of the Hermes scarf, Hermes scarf, and yes, it's exactly this color. Yes.
That wasn't my question.
Okay.
Here's my question. Now, it's interesting because we just had a description of Celia, and I just want to focus on the tyrannical and driven part of that description. I'm wondering, you know, Celia Franca, definitely there was a negative thought to her, a negative perception, I guess, in the public eye. And I'm wondering, given the times, how much do you think that had to do with the fact that she was a woman?
That's a very good question. I think some of it had to do with that, but she was just a very totally focused human being, as I think anyone who is going to do a grand creation. And so she was just as tough as nails, and I think she would be considered the same today as she was then. So I don't think she totally... She was an interesting woman in the fact that even though she was such a tough woman and a pioneer, she was not a feminist. I don't think she was a feminist. She was very much important. It was very important to her to be a married woman.
Thank you, Carol.
Borden, Mackenzie King, and Canada's World Wars, published by Alan Lane, an imprint of Penguin Canada. Of the book, the jury wrote, "We measure Robert Borden and William Lyon Mackenzie King, our two World War prime ministers, by the extent to which each rose to the occasion, led our country to bloody war, and let us out again, each of them effective warriors striving for peace. Tim Cook's Warlords, Borden, Mackenzie King, and Canada's World Wars, portrays these two men as they really were, men moderately able to lead Canada through a dark time, and despite their numerous shortcomings, particularly Mackenzie King's, able to survive politically. Cook's great achievement is his capturing of Canada as it grapples with its identity." Tim, could you join us, please?
Okay, so Tim, who thought of this title, Warlords? I'm really curious.
I thought of the title, I guess, as I do with most of them, and I pitched them to the lovely folks at Penguin Canada, and they're always very gracious, and sometimes they accept them, and sometimes they don't. But this one we thought would.
Well, what I thought was particularly interesting is the fact that these two leaders did not necessarily want to be warlords, but they had to be. So can you talk about that?
Right. Well, the book is about Sir Robert Borden and William Lyon Mackenzie King as our wartime prime ministers, and it's neither one of them appeared to be well equipped to be Canada's warlords, and they were thrust into war with no military training, with little sympathy in the case of William Lyon Mackenzie King for the armed forces and for service personnel. But that's the same for the country. The country in 1914 and the country in 1939, we were grossly unprepared for war, and we found ourselves in this terrible struggle. And I wanted to understand that experience of war on the home front, on our country, these two total wars that forever shaped our country, through the eyes of these two prime ministers. And my argument is that during the course of the war, as Canada was forced through this trial by fire and really forged in this horrendous conflict where we lost more than 110,000 dead, that our country emerged as something different, and so did these two prime ministers. And I think they are perhaps not warlords in the traditional sense, but they are particular Canadian warlords.
Thank you, Tim.
Sandra Chua for Journey with No Maps, A Life of P.K. Page, published by McGill Queen's University Press. Of the book the jury wrote, in taking on the life of P.K. Page, Sandra Joie needed to be as driven and sensitive as her subject. Journey with No Maps, The Life of P.K. Page, is not only the story of one of Canada's great artists and poets, but also a history of the flowering of Canadian literature and culture in the 20th century. Using the tools of the scholar, letters, notes, diaries, manuscripts, texts, and interviews, Joie fashions a compelling and necessary biography. She does the important job of leaving us with the big, rich life story, which gives an extra dimension to the art of a great writer.
I did an interview with Extra last week, and they said, does Leonardo need to be reclaimed by the gay community? And I said yes, because of the fact that very few people seem to know that he was, by the standards of today, homosexual, although he wouldn't have regarded himself as such because of the fact that markers of sexual identity, I'll go on boringly, were much different in the 15th century as to the 20th or the 21st. As far as the influence on his painting goes, the reason, and I can bring those two questions together, the reason it's not a woman in that painting is because of the fact that Leonardo's ideal of beauty was a person who crossed the boundary between masculinity and femininity and between youth and adulthood. And young Salai, who I describe in the book, was the exemplar of that particular look. And I do argue that Salai is probably in The Last Supper, along with various other of Leonardo's other friends. Thank you.
Andrew Preston for Sword of the Spirit, Shield of Faith, Religion in American War and Diplomacy, published by Knopf Canada. Of the book, the jury wrote, fluently written, comprehensively researched, and scrupulously balanced, Andrew Preston's Sword of the Spirit, Shield of Faith describes how the foreign policy of the United States has been and is influenced alternately decisively and marginally by the fact that so many Americans regard themselves as people chosen to do God's work. To others, and because American leaders all the way from Lincoln to George W. Bush have used religious convictions to justify political acts. Showing that the centrality of religion in American life is by no means unique to fundamentalists and neoconservatives, this important work has such chapter titles as High Priests of the Cold War and A Judeo-Christian Foreign Policy, which convey Preston's originality and indeed his bravery. Andrew Preston.
Andrew, someone told me that you're the man who looks least like his photo in the brochure. Is that true? Did you take a look?
I don't know how to answer that.
Oh, a question you can't answer. Okay.
I certainly had more hair in the photo that was taken. I won't say how many years ago, but a few years ago.
Okay. Here's your question.
Okay.
That's
not my question.
That's no, but you couldn't answer it. Let's see if you can answer this. Do you know Sir Jarmid McCulloch?
Yes.
You do. Okay, so for those of you who don't know Sir Jarmid, he is a theologian at Oxford University, and he was just here in Toronto recently. So I got to hear him lecture at U of T, and he said something that, well, it didn't remind me of you, but I thought, oh, that would be good to ask you about. And what he said is, all history is autobiography. Now, Emerson said all history is biography, but he said all history is autobiography. And I know your book it's been called balanced and it's received great reviews, but I have to ask you whether there is that struggle of writing a book like this, going back centuries, and putting yourself or not putting yourself, interpreting events. How far do you go with that? Was that a struggle?
That's a great question, Mary. I don't think there's a lot of autobiography in my book. I get asked all the time, although this is, I think, the first time this week in all the media we've done where nobody's asked me what my own personal religious views are, and I think that says a lot about Canada and Canadians, and I think that reflects well on Canada and Canadians, but it's a constant question I get asked in the United States. I'm not religious myself, so I'm not sure how much of me, in that sense, is in this book. But like a lot of Canadians, I grew up with American culture. I grew up with American politics, and I'm sure that played a role as well. I do like to think of myself as fair and balanced and all those sorts of things. But I think this book really there's not a whole lot of me in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. So I think we have now come to that time. Who has the envelope? Okay, okay, Suzanne, you've got the envelope. So now we are ready to announce the winner of the 2013 Charles Taylor Prize for Literary Nonfiction. And that includes a check for $25,000.
You're not leaving me alone up here. You weren't finished. I hate this part. The winner of the 2013 Charles Taylor Prize for Literary Nonfiction is Andrew Preston.
Wow. I really don't know what to say. I mean, I really don't know what to say. These aren't my papers. I didn't prepare anything. I didn't think I was going to win. I'm extremely grateful for this award, extremely honored, extremely flattered. I'm extremely honored as a Canadian being able to come back and receive this extremely prestigious award and to be back in Toronto, a city I lived in for quite some time. I was born here. I was raised in Eastern Ontario. I went to U of T, and so this means a lot to me. I said this the other day. This means a lot to me personally, as well as professionally. But it did so even before I found out that I won this award, and I'm completely blown away. I'd like to thank Noreen, as I'm sure we all do, and I know we all do, for establishing this prize of. I mean, it's a visionary award in the sense of celebrating literary nonfiction. And we all are in her debt. I'm more so right now, more in her debt, literally, than I thought I would be. But we are all, in some sense, in her debt. And I'd like to thank her for that. I'd like to thank the people who you probably don't know, or a lot of you here do know them, but they work behind the scenes, people I've worked with this week to make everything a real success. On the publicity side, Stephen Weir and Karina Eberly and June Dickinson for the incomparable June Dickinson for all her organizational efforts. So thanks to those three. It's actually typical that June and Karina are standing out of sight against the wall, making sure I'm not sure where Stephen is. I'm sure he's here, hopefully. But anyway, thank you so much for all your efforts. I'd like to thank people from Knopf Canada who were at my table: Louise Dennis and Brad Martin, Francis Bedford, my publicist, and last but not least, my editor, Paul Taunton, who is very much a man in the spirit of this prize. He's very literate, very literary, loves books, and I love talking to him, and I look forward, hopefully, I'm putting you on the spot now, Paul, but hopefully to working with him again in the future. I should also say I'd like to thank my editor in New York. This is a joint Knopf Canada, Knopf New York book, Andrew Miller, who is also, like Paul, a lover of books and also a lover of, like Paul, a lover of sports. So, as am I, so we had a lot to talk about. And I'd like to thank Andrew Miller for all his hard work. It's a very long book, but I won't scare you with the numbers, but it was a much longer book when I finished it, and the manuscript I originally submitted was much longer. Paul knows that as well. I'd like to thank my agent, Andrew Wiley, who is, I think, the best in the business, and I won't say any more than that. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank my family. My parents who are here, Mary and Harry, who drove down from Brockville, Ontario, where I was raised. I had dedicated the book to them for their own love of reading, our house was always full of books, all sorts of books, fiction, nonfiction, classics, some lowbrow trash in the espionage, thriller, spy thriller genre. I won't say whether that was my mom or my dad, but you can probably guess. But there were magazines and newspapers, and I'm very grateful to them. And I'd like to thank my wife, who isn't here. She's back in England, Fran, and my kids, Rosie and Lizzie. I know they're with me in spirit, and I've been getting lots of texts from her, so I can send her back a nice text. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you.
I don't know if you know the story of how Andrew came to write this book, but he's a professor, and some students were asking him questions, and he couldn't answer them. He didn't know the answer. And the questions were about the whole intersection of religion and American foreign policy diplomacy. And so what did he do? He goes away for 10 years, researches the answer, and comes out with his book. So congratulations. You know, and I said jokingly to Andrew that this is great. Now even that you've won the award, this means your students will go, well, what can we ask Andrew next? Anyway, congratulations, Andrew. Also, congratulations to all our authors today. Carol Bishop Gwynn, Sandra Jwat, Ross King, and also Tim Cook. That concludes, or Noreen, are you going to say anything? Or no, you are.
I was going to invite you back next year for another good time.
So come back next year. Thank you all for coming today. Have a good day.